Hey guys, this is Dave with Audio Win, and today we are going to be taking a look at the Fiio Fd15, and it's been quite a while since I've had any Fiio IEMs come across my review desk. I think the last Fiio set I reviewed was the FX15, which I really liked, but if we go all the way back to 2019, the first few sets that really kind of caught my attention by Fiio were the FH3, FH5, and then the FH7, which I gave that to my brother, and he still uses them occasionally. And for their time, I felt like those were decent sets. But the reality is that you just didn't have nearly the amount of competition that you do now, at least within those price brackets. But that's changed dramatically. And now we have the FD15, which is going up against a ton of other great IEMs. And I think I counted around 30 IEMs just in my collection that this is competing with in the $100 to $200 price bracket. So of course, the question is, how does the F15 stack up against all of that competition? Well, that's the question I'm going to try and answer in today's review. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. So this is everything that's included in the package. We've got the IEMs and cable. They've also included a very interesting case, 2 sets of tuning nozzles, 2 interchangeable terminations, a 3.5 single-ended and then a 4.4 balanced termination for the modular cable. You have a very large assortment of ear tips, a tool they've included that makes it a little easier to disconnect the MMCX connectors at the earpieces, and then a cleaning tool. It's priced at $149 and it has a single 13.8 millimeter dynamic driver setup. The driver is housed in an all metal shell, which does look and feel pretty robust. It also does have just a small amount of weight to it. Not much though, as to cause any discomfort, or at least not for me. And again, you do have a pretty decent ear tip selection as well. So I think with most people, they should be able to find a combination that works well for their ears. All in all, I have found it to be a pretty comfortable set. The design is kind of simple, but I do think it's nice. I don't mind the simplicity, and they actually give you 2 color options to choose from, silver or black. Of course, I chose the black, and I'm glad I did because I think it just looks nice and sleek. Although I am maybe just a tad bit worried it could chip over time, although up to this point I haven't had any issues. The cable is decent. It's modular, so you can choose again between a 3.5 or 4.4 termination, so I can definitely appreciate that. It is just a little on the thick side though, and while I haven't really had any issues as far as tangling, because of that extra heft, it can be a little bit of a tight squeeze in the case. Just a little bit though, not really a big deal. And of course it does use the MMCX connectors, which they aren't my favorite, but they do work perfectly fine, I guess. I just always have that fear that they'll eventually start to loosen up and it'll start cutting out over time, which is basically exactly what happened to my FH3s and FH5s and even to my FH7s. Now the case is also very interesting. It's made out of a clear hard plastic, and it appears as though the bottom and the top is Lego compatible. Unfortunately, I don't have any Legos, but it does still look cool, and more importantly, it actually does accomplish its primary goal of protecting the IEMs. Okay, let's move on to the sound. So the general sound presentation of the FD15 is what I would call neutral warm, and that is with either filter. And while there definitely are some differences in the upper mid-range between the two filters, the differences are slight, and generally speaking, the presentations of both are pretty similar. I will say that between the two nozzles, I prefer the black one because it just seemed to sound a little more natural to me, especially in the upper mid-range. But let's go ahead and break it down a little more, and then what we'll do right now at least is focus primarily on the black nozzle because that's the one I did most of my listening with it, and then I will touch on the red nozzle towards the end. So as far as bass levels, while I do think they stay within the parameters of having a mostly neutral presentation, they are maybe on the higher end of neutral, at least to my ear. I don't feel like they dominate the presentation though, and I do feel like the levels are right about where they should be for this tuning approach. And what's nice is the bass is clean and controlled as far as how they handled that transition out of the bass into the mids, because I'm not picking up on any bass pleat or any muddiness in the mid bass or the lower mids, which is nice to see at this price point. And the bass is also punchy. It's got good dynamics, which again is definitely something I would always hope to see in a dynamic driver. So the FD15's bass is really quite good for this price point, and probably one of my favorite attributes about this set. Now, the rest of the tuning, if I'm being honest, is a little hit and miss for me, mainly because of some unnaturalness, not just in the upper mids, but also in the treble. And with the upper mids, I think what's going on is that they started the pinna gain a little early, around 2K, and then there is some loss of energy beyond that until you pass about the 6K mark, which I think, again, that's causing vocals and instruments to sound a little bit unnatural and even veiled to a degree. And normally what I like to see is the ear gain start maybe a little later, maybe around 3K, because it seems like that usually translates into a more natural presentation, again, at least to my ears. Now, I do like the upper mid-range energy because it's a little more relaxed and laid back, so it doesn't ever really reach the point of sounding shouty or, over dominating the presentation. And the levels generally seem to balance out well against the bass. So the mid-range energy is good, but it can sound a little unnatural and veiled at times. And again, this is with the black nozzle. So again, the upper mids are a little more relaxed, but that energy does pick up a little when you transition into the treble. And as far as the general treble levels, I think it's okay. I don't know if I would call it dark because it does have a pretty decent amount of upper treble, but my main issue is that it can start to get a little peaky depending on the recording. And again, there's just something about the way they approached the tuning that is causing some of the percussive instruments like the snare attack and the cymbal strikes to sound a little splashy and maybe even a touch unnatural to me. And for me, being a drummer, those things are kind of important. Now, as far as its technical performance, I would say it's okay. I don't know if I would consider it to be really that competitive though for this $150 price, because it seems to maybe be performing more in line with IEMs around $100, like the Explorer and maybe even the Aria 2. And I really don't even know if it's that much better than the Delcy AE, if I'm being perfectly honest. But to be more specific about its performance, it does have maybe a little more of an intimate staging. So while it does have fairly decent left to right width, it's not as wide as the Explorer or the Aria 2. And also the forward depth is a little more intimate as well. And while I wouldn't necessarily say it's completely flat, I wouldn't describe it as a wall of sound, but it is placing vocals and instruments a little closer to you, to the listener. Now, as far as detail levels, again, it's just okay. And again, just to be honest, I don't think it's going to be competing with other IEMs in the $150 price bracket. But just to go back to why I prefer the black nozzle over the red nozzle, if you remember, one of the problems I had with the black nozzle is that because of where they placed the ear gain at 2K, and because there was some significant energy loss or a drop off after that in the 3 to 5K region, I felt like that may have been mostly to blame for some of the unnaturalness that I was picking up on. And with the red nozzle, that is actually even more exaggerated. It's more noticeable because they still have that ear gain focused at about 2K, but then you have even more energy loss than the black nozzle between 3 and 6K. Again, contributing even further to some of that unnaturalness in vocals and instruments. But in almost every other regard, the red nozzle is very similar to the black nozzle in its general tuning. So I guess for me, at the end of the day, the FD15 it doesn't quite fit my personal tuning preference. And I know there may be those out there that do like it. And there are aspects of its tuning that I think are done pretty well. I think the bass performance is good. I like the small amount of warmth in the low mids. I do think it's balanced. And I do like the relaxed mid-range presentation. My biggest concern is mainly the unnaturalness in the way that it portrays vocals and instruments. And for me personally, I just feel like there are less expensive options that offer equal or even in some cases better sound performance, like the Explorer, the Magic 1 RA2, and the EA500. So that concludes my review of the Fiio Fd15. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch. If you like my content, please take a second and hit that subscribe button. Also, if you would please like this video, please share this video. I hope you guys have an awesome day.